Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome in here, Slaughterhouse Sports, Kurt Magoosh, and we have new updates out of Colorado today, pretty much dropping tonight. We have a couple of more updates. So tonight, Charles Kelly has now formally been announced to be the defensive coordinator. Now, this isn't Mike Zimmer. Yesterday, there were reports circulating out there that Mike Zimmer might be calling plays, but Mike Zimmer's going to be in an advisory role just like he was at Jackson State, and Charles Kelly will be calling plays. Now, for Mike Zimmer, maybe Mike Zimmer in the process can kind of really see the college game and can maybe Mike Zimmer can really see a lot more of these offenses and continue to get used to, the air raid system. So a lot of Alabama people might know Charles Kelly. A lot of Florida State people are going to know Charles Kelly because he's been coaching. He's around the same age as Deion Sanders. He's from Alabama. Charles Kelly actually was at Jackson State. He was at Nicholls State for, I believe, a long time. So I'm going to pull up his entire dossier, his entire resume here, and then I'll give an opinion about my honest opinion about Charles Kelly, whether I really like it. Again, I'm rooting for Deion to do well at Colorado in this process. This is an interesting hire, Charles Kelly, on numerous fronts. But Deion Sanders pretty much recruited Charles Kelly over to this position. So Charles Kelly was with Florida State, of course, Deion's alma mater, from 2013 to 2017. I think during those years, Jameis Winston was there. They won a national championship. So he was a defensive, basically a defensive coordinator at Florida State, guys, from 2014 to 2017, and then Jimbo Fisher decided to bounce. In 2020, Alabama won the national championship, but he was the safeties coach from 2019 to 2022. So he worked under Pete Golding, who is like he's a 38-year-old coach, I believe is the Alabama defensive coordinator right now. So he's worked under like Pete Golding, who is at Alabama. I'd say Bama's defenses have been okay, but I don't know if Pete Golding is going to survive this season. So basically Pete Golding in 2018 was given the job, and Charles Kelly went to Tennessee as a special teams coordinator, maybe with Jeremy Pruitt, in 2018, and then he went to Alabama from 2019 to 2022. He was at Georgia Tech though for 4 years, or he was at Georgia Tech from 2006 to 2012. He was at Georgia Tech, so he's bounced around a lot. So the one thing about Charles Kelly is he going to be able to call plays effectively? He's only been a defensive coordinator for about 3 years. Now, he's worked in football. He's been a D coordinator. Okay, he was at Henderson State and Jack State in Alabama. So he's been a defensive coordinator about 6 or 7 years. He's worked with the secondary cornerbacks and special teams for a very long time. He just was at Alabama, so he has seen a lot of high-level football. He had to try to keep up with Tennessee's offenses with Josh Heupel. He had to try to keep up with Lane Kiffin lately. I mean, Alabama's safeties and cornerbacks lately, I don't think they've been as prolific as they've been in the past with like Minkah Fitzpatrick and like Marlon Humphrey and some of those guys. Maybe that's a fault of Nick Saban or Pete Golding or the entire or the defensive staff. But yeah, like, honestly, Charles Kelly wouldn't have been my first choice. Like, I worry a little bit about Charles Kelly. I'm not sure about his identity. We're going to have to go back to Florida State and figure out his defensive identity. But Deion Sanders seems to really like this hire. The one thing is Charles Kelly can definitely tell guys about, the players that he coached at Florida State, that he coached at Tennessee, Alabama, even Georgia Tech. So he's been around some NFL talent, we could say that. So really looking at Alabama, actually, He worked with the safeties. I know Trevon Diggs is a guy who was at Alabama during that time. You guys can also help with. Listing some guys that ended up in the NFL that were cornerbacks recently at Alabama. I think Alabama was better on defense in the mid-2000s, but it might be a product of the up-tempo offenses because Alabama really tried to get aggressive on the offensive side of the ball. We all know about their wide receivers and quarterbacks the last several years. But Nick Saban, guys, if he's the assistant defensive coordinator and safeties coach for Nick Saban for the past 3 years, and he's worked with Jimbo Fisher, he's worked with tremendous programs and coaches. So he definitely is experienced. It's so different than Sean Lewis. Sean Lewis is kind of this 35-year-old wizard on the offensive side of the ball that hasn't worked with a lot of people on the on defense. And Charles Kelly's a guy who's bounced around and is a vet defensive coordinator. I think it's crucial for Mike Zimmer to also be a part of this process, but I also want there to be young and hungry, position coaches that are lined up around these OG coaches. And the thing is, I do worry a little bit about Charles Kelly. He's not a long-term defensive coordinator. He's not like Kevin Steele. He's not like Will Muschamp. Like, he hasn't been doing it for the longest of times. Like, there's a lot of other guys, like even Clayton White was a defensive coordinator at South Carolina that has done it a while longer. Even Bronco Mendenhall. Like, there's a lot of former coaches that are defensive-oriented guys. I just think Charles Kelly, it's interesting that Sanders locked in on Kelly. I think there would have been a lot of interest in this position. I definitely worry about it. It's certainly not like my first choice. I worry about it because he's bounced around a lot. He was part of Jimbo Fisher, which didn't work out. Jeremy Pruitt. He was at Georgia Tech for about 5 years. Deion Sanders, though, knows character, I believe, and he really trusts Charles Kelly in this role. It's interesting that Mike Zimmer is actually not going to be the option here, that you're going with a Charles Kelly, but I want Mike Zimmer to be very involved with this process, and I also want there to be plenty of young and I want there to be young also influences with the defense along with Charles Kelly. So Charles Kelly will be coordinating it. I'm excited to see about the cornerbacks coach and the other coaches that will also be there as well. So it's interesting. You have Sean Lewis on one side of the coin, who's about 35, who's very young, who's very in tune and successful as an OC, and he was a head coach. Now you have Charles Kelly, a lifelong defensive coordinator, who played at Auburn. So this is a very, very intriguing move here, Charles Kelly going to Jackson State. I'm curious what you guys think. I mean, we're going to have to see this play out on the field. I know that we're all going to, be trusting this Deion Sanders process here. But at the same time, he's been around a lot, but he hasn't really been a very prominent defensive coordinator for being around a lot, and he's also bounced from place to place. So what type of stability are we getting here with Charles Kelly as a defensive coordinator? We're going to have to see how that plays out. It's not a guy that I definitively know well, and I am kind of skeptical on the move right now of the defensive coordinator. But we're going to have to see, what transpires here with Charles Kelly. Charles Kelly, so his entire career, he was at Jackson State. I'll give him that. He was at Jackson State from 94 to 98. And there he was actually an offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator at Jacksonville State. There is a difference there for sure. Nicholls State, defensive coordinator for 1 year. Then Georgia Tech as a special teams coach. Then he goes from, DBs, 2008 to 2012, defensive backs. So a lot of working with the defensive backs. So we're going to have to be incongruent with the D-line here because we have a lot of secondary guys, but we're going to have to be congruent with the defensive line and get them playing together and get them synced up. So that's the new news out of Colorado. There's also an offensive line coach. I'm going to make that video right now. Thank you guys for watching.